What family secret has been kept away from only you, and how did you find out about it? My father was a notorious womanizer, and I have half-siblings all over the country. Collectively, we think we have found all of us, and have made contact both in person and via social media over the years. There is still some debate about whether there is another missing sister, but this is not about that. I mention it only to set up the reason for my surprise later. At the time, I worked for the sheriff's department, assigned to the jail section, but my main responsibilities were community programs like car seat safety, essay registry, and other outreach programs. On the day in question, I got a call over the radio that I had a personal phone call. I had the dispatcher forward it to my phone, assuming it was my wife, so I did not think much of it. When I answered, a young woman verified I was indeed SharkDog73 and then told me she was my niece. Knowing my father's habit of creating children and disappearing, I tried to figure out exactly who she belonged to. To my surprise, I discovered I had another half-brother I did not know about, but he was not my dad's child. He was my mother's. Apparently, my mother had given birth to him 7 years before I was born, when she was 19, and had given him up for adoption. This was in the late 1960s, and unwed mothers were highly frowned upon in small farming communities like ours. Everyone in the family knew of the scandal and knew that she had eventually given the baby up. This was something nobody had ever told me because it was meant to be forgotten, and that is just how my family handled such matters. My niece had no idea I did not know. In fact, her dad, my brother, had told her not to expect me to even give her the time of day because he had made several attempts to contact mom without success. To her surprise, I had no clue about them and welcomed them into my family. After I got off the phone, I called my aunt. If anyone would tell me the truth, it was her, and she was surprisingly open about the entire situation. I asked her to accompany me this coming weekend so I could speak to my mother, and she reluctantly agreed. When the weekend arrived, I met my aunt at my mother's house and told her I knew about my brother. At first, she was defensive, but I assured her I was not mad. I explained that I understood things were different back then and that I only wanted to know the story. She gave me the basic rundown, but to this day, she refuses to disclose who his father is, which we have come to accept. Fast forward about 2 years to my daughter's graduation party. By then, Joe and I had met several times and gotten to know each other quite well. It was amazing how alike we really were. We invited him and his daughter to the graduation party, though they lived several hours away, so we did not expect them to attend. To my surprise, and if I am honest, horror, they showed up. In this confined space were my half-brother and the entire family, who did not know who he was but somehow did at the same time. My aunt knew because she had been talking to him via Facebook, but everyone else was oblivious. Joe and his daughter sat at an empty table, and I went over and joined them. I pointed out who my mom was and introduced everyone, including my grandmother, who was in her 90s. None of us knew exactly how to handle the situation, but we did our best to hide our nervousness. After a while, someone took Grandma home, and the crowd dwindled to the core family and close extended family, including cousins, aunts, and uncles. By this time, Mom had either figured it out or my aunt had told her. She walked over to us and asked if we were going to join the rest of the family at the big table. Once we sat down, she introduced Joe as her son. Everyone's eyes went wide, including mine, because I had not told her who he was. After a flurry of questions about his life and family, everything settled and we sat around like we had always known each other. To this day, grandmother does not know who Joe is because we fear the shock would end her. He always makes sure to greet her whenever he sees her. She believes he is just a good friend of mine. Joe, his daughter Stacy, and his mom communicate on Facebook, and whenever Joe visits, his mom comes along. It has been nearly a decade since we first spoke, and Joe still struggles with how to address mom, asking, "Do I call her mom or by her name?" Joe's adoptive family is gone, and he is the only one left from that side, except for a brother he does not get along. So, we spend a lot of time together when he is in town. He moved closer about a year ago, which makes it much easier to get together. Story 2. My mother was a crazy person. Things became unbearable when I was young, so I went to live with my grandparents. I love them dearly and still consider them my only true biological family. I rarely speak to the rest of the relatives because my mother's behavior had driven such a wedge between everyone that no real bonds were ever formed. Growing up, I was told that Jack wanted nothing to do with me. When my stepfather, my mother's second husband, adopted my brother and me, I was told that my brother's father had fought the adoption, while Jack didn't give a crap, supposedly, and signed the papers immediately. My mother painted Jack as heartless and careless throughout my life. She was very young when she had me, and she often took out her frustrations on me with cruelty and anger. The physical abuse mostly stopped once she married my stepfather, but the emotional scars lingered. When I was around 13 or 14, during one of her drunken rages, we got into a fight like usual. I threatened to go live with my grandparents again, and she shouted out something that changed everything. She claimed that my grandfather had harmed both her and her sister, and that her sister had been blackmailing him ever since. My aunt lived rent-free in one of my grandfather's houses and drove a car he paid for entirely. That revelation explained a lot about my mother's instability, but then there was still Jack. For years, I believed that Jack had abandoned me. I convinced myself that I didn't need to meet him, that I didn't care. I already had one toxic parent. I didn't need another. But not too long ago, Jack was in an accident and passed away. To my surprise, I learned that he had lived in the same city as me for most of my life. Out of curiosity and something deeper I couldn't name, I decided to attend his viewing quietly, without telling anyone who I was. It was strange and unsettling. I looked so much like him that it caught people's attention. My wife encouraged me to attend the funeral service too, and I did. That's where I unexpectedly ran into my half-sister and Jack's wife. They asked to meet me later, saying they already knew who I was. When we met in a public place, Jack's wife began to tell me everything she knew about me. My job, the time I had been in trouble with the law, my wife, my children, even where I had lived over the years. At first, I was terrified at how much she knew. But then I realized the truth. Jack had not abandoned me. He had quietly kept track of me for my entire life. It turned out that he had been the one trying to stop the adoption. According to his wife, my mother had bribed a judge to remove his parental rights, which was how the adoption went through. She also revealed that one of the main reasons I had been sent to another state was to keep my father from finding me. With all the lies I had grown up believing, it was hard to take in. Apparently, my uncle had stayed in touch with Jack and had secretly passed along updates about me. I would talk to my grandparents, they would tell my uncle, and my uncle would relay everything to my father. A few days after meeting Jack's wife, I received a package from her. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures of me from birth up to nearly the present day. Some letters had been returned to Jack and a thick envelope, nearly 4 inches of court documents proving that Jack had fought for me every step of the way. As for my grandfather, did he harm his daughters? Probably. It would explain many of their deep emotional wounds. But after a lifetime of lies from my mother, a sliver of doubt remains. Still, I would never trust my grandfather to be alone with my daughter. Story 3. I never had the chance to know my grandparents. Growing up, the only story I ever heard was that my grandmother and grandfather got into a car wreck one December. Around that time of year, my mother would always become quieter. Her emotions softened by the sweet smell of biscuit cookies, a Swiss treat from our heritage. Whenever I asked what really happened, she would only say, "They got into an accident." Eventually, I stopped asking and went on with my teenage life. Fast forward to Thanksgiving of 2016. I decided to head home late one night from a girl's house. Something in me whispered that I should. When I reached home, my family was gathered around the fire pit in the backyard, laughing and sharing drinks. I was trying to clear my foggy mind when the tone of the conversation changed. Suddenly, my mother was being asked questions like, "How did he do it? And what about his side of the family?" My curiosity sharpened instantly. Maybe, finally, the truth was coming out. The story unfolded slowly. My grandmother had wanted to leave my grandfather because she missed her homeland. They had moved from Switzerland to Las Vegas in the late 1960s, so my grandfather could chase his dream of becoming a pastry chef. He succeeded, creating beautiful cakes for celebrities while working as the head pastry chef at the Bellagio. But when my grandmother spoke of leaving, everything began to crumble. My grandfather didn't want to lose her. He wanted his wife, his family, and his dream to stay whole. But sometimes, even the best plans collapse. On December 13th, 1979, my mother, then 23, got a call from the police saying there had been an incident at home and that she needed to come quickly to get her teenage sister, my aunt, who was 14. What happened wasn't an accident at all. It was a brutal ending of lives. My grandmother had been packing to leave when things turned violent. There was shouting, and from what I've gathered, deep emotions and heartbreak filled the air. The details of what my grandfather did are hazy, but it was clear that pain and desperation drove him. Afterward, he wrote a final letter to his children saying he loved them deeply. In his dazed, drunken, pill-clouded state, he drove off and collided head-on with a semi-truck. The driver later came to the funeral and told my mother there was nothing he could have done. It all happened too fast. After that night, my mother had to step up. She took care of her teenage sister and their elderly great-aunt, who was slowly fading with age. Despite everything, she never hated her father. She told me once that she believed he was sick, not cruel. She said he had been a good man at heart, just broken in ways no one saw. Life forced her to grow up overnight, to care for others when she herself needed care. Back in Switzerland, my grandmother's and grandfather's families split apart completely. Blame flew from one side to another, each relative pointing fingers and refusing to speak. Yet, through all of it, my mother held her composure. She didn't blame anyone. She cared for others, even when her own heart was heavy. Alone in the United States, she became the strength the family needed. It was one of the most difficult challenges anyone could face, but because of it, I have the strongest role model I could ever imagine. I'm proud of my mother at 23. She wasn't just dealing with the struggles of early adulthood, she was also holding her entire family together. There was no chance to back out, no parents to turn to, no easy escape. She had only herself, and that was enough. To anyone who took the time to read her story, I grew up believing my grandparents died in a car crash. But the truth was much darker. My grandfather, consumed by heartbreak and despair, offed himself after ending my grandmother's life. My mother, just 23, became the rock that kept everyone else from falling apart. Her courage shaped the person I am today. Story 4. This incident completely shifted my perception of reality and caused me to question many things for years. One day, I received a message on Facebook from a man claiming that his wife was my half-sister. My initial reaction was disbelief, because my mom is highly religious, an ultra-conservative Christian who I could never imagine having an intimate relationship with outside of marriage. I told him he must have the wrong person, but then he started revealing information that wasn't public knowledge. After many years of searching, his wife had finally obtained her birth certificate, though several names had been blacked out. Using careful sleuthing, they discerned my uncle's very uncommon name under the black and began searching for all individuals with that name who had a sister. I still struggled to believe my mom had a child at 20 while attending flight attendant school. Coming from a small farming community in North Dakota with a population of 600, none of this seemed possible. When I contacted my uncle, all he said was that he would be happy to discuss anything except that specific situation, which only confirmed my suspicions that it was real. Eventually, I spoke on the phone with my half-sister and her husband. They were patient and understanding of my skepticism, which helped ease my doubts. It became clear that they had been attempting to contact my mom for some time, which explained her sudden habit of screening phone calls and her abrupt departure from Facebook. They hoped I could help facilitate communication with my mom. My mom and I rarely discuss anything substantial. She avoids real or troubling matters and often responds with prayers or changes the subject. The idea of asking her about a child born out of wedlock was overwhelming, emotionally taxing, and nerve-wracking. I had to summon every ounce of courage to call her, living 2,000 miles away at the time. When I asked, she confirmed the story but offered no further details and requested that I not mention it to my brothers or anyone else. I relayed this information to my half-sister and her husband, who became increasingly aggressive, pushing for more information. They wanted the father's name so they could reach him, but my mom refused, citing concerns about the father's situation and his family. Their insistence began to wear me down. I felt frustrated and turned off by the process, realizing that the overly forceful behavior of her husband dulled my interest in developing a relationship with my half-sister. I gradually cooled things down, maintaining minimal contact with them. Nevertheless, he continued to message me every few months, pressuring me for information, despite my repeated explanations that my mom had made her decision and would not change her mind. Then, one night, I received an email from her husband after my dad had passed away from complications of MS. He stated that he was not sorry for my dad's passing because I had experienced a life with two parents and a relatively stable upbringing, and that I had failed my job to obtain the information. He threatened to contact other family members despite my explicit request to leave them out of it. The next morning, my dumb older brother, who still lived at home at 37 and had never maintained a real job, posted on Facebook, "What would you do if you found a long-lost sister?" I was like, what the heck? I scrambled to contain the situation, contacting my older brother to take down the post, and instructed my younger brother to avoid mentioning anything. That evening, chaos erupted in our family, and I eventually told them, "Go ask Mom." Exhausted and frustrated, I realized I was merely enabling my mom to avoid confrontation with her past. Ultimately, after confronting my mom about her daughter's husband, who was an a-hole, blackmail tactics, she revealed the father's name. I later discovered that he had passed away a few years prior from a heart attack on the side of the road. I informed my half-sister that while I respected her, I could not tolerate her husband's behavior and would not maintain a relationship under those conditions. Today, my mom has still not spoken to her daughter, but I keep in touch with my half-sister occasionally through Facebook, where we can observe each other's lives from a safe distance. It's worth noting that my upbringing was far from perfect, and my half-sister was fortunate to grow up in an affluent, loving household, attending college with the full support of her adoptive parents. I joined the Army for educational benefits, having never witnessed displays of affection from my parents outside of holidays. Strangers contacted me on Facebook, revealing that I have a half-sister from my mom before she was married. After verifying the story and attempting to facilitate communication, I faced blackmail and aggressive behavior from her husband. I eventually shared only what was necessary, and now my half-sister and I maintain minimal contact, while my mom continues to avoid acknowledgement. Story 5. This story isn't mine, it's my sister's. When she was little, at the end of the summer of 1997, we had a cat who had been part of our family for several years. She was incredibly sweet, and especially close to my sister. But one day, something changed. We never knew exactly why. Maybe she got frightened or had a bad experience. But afterward, she became very nervous and withdrawn. She would hide under my sister's bed and hiss or scratch if anyone tried to get too close. Her behavior became unpredictable, and it was hard to approach her safely. That morning, the world learned that Princess Diana had died. For anyone who didn't grow up during that time, it's hard to describe just how significant her passing was. People genuinely loved her. Though she was England's royalty, she felt like the world's princess. My mom, who bore a striking resemblance to Diana, so much so that people who saw old photos of her from the 80s and 90s were always amazed, was a devoted admirer. In the United States, Diana was deeply respected and admired, perhaps only rivaled by figures like the Pope. She was more famous then than many global celebrities are today. Her death, so sudden and shocking, felt almost unreal. The grief was immense, as though the world had lost someone larger than life, someone who represented kindness, grace, and compassion on a global scale. That morning, my dad and I were both deeply shaken when we woke up and learned the news. My mom, in shock, left the house to keep herself occupied and take her mind off the tragedy. At the time, my sister wasn't home with my dad, which was unusual, since they were very close and spent nearly every weekend together. My dad decided we needed to safely capture the cat and figure out what to do next. I went into my sister's room with a broom, hoping to gently guide the cat out from under the bed. But she panicked, hissing, growling, and refusing to move. After a moment of struggle, she finally darted out into the living room. Something about her was deeply unsettling. The way she moved and reacted made it clear that whatever was troubling her had grown beyond anything we could handle on our own. I put on an oven mitt and tried to grab her before she could slip under the couch, but she cut through it like it wasn't there. I thought if I could get her into a box, we could take her to the vet. When my dad saw me struggling, he went downstairs while I kept coaxing, even though I knew it might be hopeless. He came back up with something heavy from the garage. At that point, I was frantic and said something I barely remember asking, a reckless, stunned question born of fear. He didn't answer the way I expected. Instead, he told me to lift the couch. We counted down 3, 2, 1, and I heaved. She ran forward and my dad struck her hard behind the head. She collapsed and went still. I was already raw from that morning's news, and I love cats. My cat Maddie is on my lap as I type this, so I started to well up as I looked at her lifeless body on the floor. My dad grabbed a trash bag and put her in it. I wanted to bury her, but he worried our dog would dig her up. "We don't tell Nina about any of this," he said. "As far as she knows, the cat just ran away." And that was that. About a week later, my sister asked about the cat, and we told her she must have run away. She was a little sad, but we still had our dog, so she began to grow closer to him. I've never really been a dog person and probably never will be, but he was the sweetest dog in the world, a black lab named Shadow that we rescued from the pound. He was loving, loyal, and a little too attached to us. If we left him alone for too long, he'd get so anxious that he'd have accidents when we came back. He lived nearly 20 years, and if dogs go to heaven, he's probably up there now, happy and at peace. 2 Christmases ago, I casually brought up to my dad what had happened with the cat all those years ago. 19 years had passed, and my sister still didn't know. By then, she'd gone to college and joined the Marine Corps, and my dad had never told her. When I finally did, she almost started to cry. At first, she thought we were joking. "You're not serious, are you? I love that cat," she said. She was the last one to know. We had kept that secret from her for nearly 2 decades, not out of cruelty, but to protect her from a memory none of us wanted her to carry. Story 6. It wasn't me, but my boyfriend who recently discovered, at the age of 28, that the man he had always believed to be his father was not his biological dad. This revelation turned out to be a relief, considering his dad was an abusive, alcoholic, manipulative screw-off, and he had already cut all ties with both of his parents years ago. He had always felt different from his siblings and believed he was treated more cruelly, particularly by his stepdad. This explained a lot, including why he looked slightly different from the other children. I found out a couple of months before my boyfriend's half-sister told him. Now, not any relation at all, not that it changes anything. His parents told this half-sister and her mother, his stepdad's ex-partner, when she was 7, and instructed her not to tell anyone. At that point, the only people who likely knew were his mother's extended family in the Philippines, his stepdad, and maybe his biological father. She carried on with her life and mostly forgot about it until they went on a family vacation to the Philippines. An extended family member almost let it slip to my boyfriend, but he was not paying attention. His half-sister frantically made the stop it now motion, knowing it was not the right time for him to find out. Then she carried this secret for a long time, terrified that if she told anyone, her dad, my boyfriend's stepdad, could make good on his threats. The most frightening part for her was knowing that he could easily hurt her. He had almost hurt every family member at some point in the past through his violence. However, she could not keep it inside her for her entire life, so once most of the siblings went no contact with the parents a few years back, she told his brother and his wife. Then, the stepdad accidentally revealed the secret to my boyfriend's sister. His youngest sister still does not know, as far as we believe. She will not, or is not allowed to, speak with anyone regarding it. Apparently, his mom had been seeing an American man and his stepdad, who is Australian, at the same time. For some unknown reason, she chose the stepdad. All we know is that this man is American. We do not know his name or any other details. We are considering doing an ancestry DNA test at some point. However, we are not even sure if he knows he has a child. Perhaps he is not alive. Perhaps the reason his mom chose the stepdad over the other man was because he left once she informed him of her pregnancy. All these questions will remain unanswered unless he contacts his biological father, because he will not break the contact, and he should not, for his own mental health. Ultimately, I am horrified it took this long for him to discover the truth. The timing of when I was told was also not ideal. His half-sister decided when my boyfriend and I announced our engagement that she should share this secret with me and gauge if he was ready to hear it. This occurred only a few weeks after I started a new job and 2 months before Christmas, so the stress was compounded. On the one hand, I understand why she felt she had to keep it for so long. She explained that she feared for her life, as her dad knows where she lives and could appear at any moment if he felt like threatening or harming her or her family. Yet, it was very difficult to hear that he was essentially the last person to know this about his own life and history. It felt profoundly wrong. My boyfriend's reaction to hearing the news was exactly as I had predicted. Relief, as the like father, like son thought lingering in the back of his mind, vanished. Even though he is the complete opposite of his stepdad, he had always subconsciously feared that biological connection might define him. There was also almost immediate acceptance, at least on the surface. Deep down, he had always known, I think. In fact, his half-sister and I had informed him a few days before she arrived that she had important news to share and that I already knew what it was. This way, he would be more prepared and less shocked. The night before her arrival, I asked him how he felt about the big news. He said that if it involved his parents, he would not care. He had cut ties with them long ago, and it did not affect him anymore. Then he added, if it were something like not being related to them, he would be happy. At that moment, I realized he was going to be okay. It has only been a few days, but he has already told some of his friends, which I believe has been helpful for him to process everything. He has even mentioned that we could both change our last names to something entirely new when we get married. He said he now feels like a person without an identity in a positive sense because he has no ties to his father at all and can genuinely reinvent himself. Story 7. I have multiple stories. 1. He did not really have financial troubles, just a very unwell wife. Both of my parents had a son born within a week of each other. That was around the time the contact suddenly stopped. The best I could come up with in my 6-year-old mind was that he got a family and no longer wanted me, just like my mom. By the way, I do not know how Child Protective Services never got involved when I went to school with handprints on my back, and my mom was a repeat offender of not picking me up. I spent many nights in the office with a teacher waiting while she called repeatedly. So his second wife was really fragile and mentally unstable. She wanted him to have no contact with me, so much so that he was not allowed to fulfill his court-ordered obligations to me. He basically had to sneak around, sending payments or making calls, leaving no trace behind. No phone records, no bank records, nothing. I completely understand why he did this. He did what he had to do to protect his wife's mental state and the small child and later children he had at home. I 100% do not fault him for that. He went above and beyond for me when he sneaked around trying to do what he could without upsetting his wife. They later divorced, and he is now remarried to a truly wonderful woman. 2. I unfortunately do not get to see him, except for once at his mother's funeral. However, we do text and email fairly regularly. It is somewhat spaced out because we both have a lot going on. My stepmother is a little more of a talker, so I tend to text and email with her more frequently. 3. He is on the West Coast. I am in the middle of the country, and my mom is about 4 hours east of me. I would absolutely move closer to him and leave her behind, except I doubt I would enjoy his location. I really dislike densely populated areas, and he is certainly in one. Property is also incredibly expensive there. I grew up financially in this area. Here, the minimum wage is $7.85 per hour, and the cost of living index is 82.30. I rent a 3-bedroom house with a full basement and 8 acres of pasture for $600 a month. There, the minimum wage is $15 per hour, and the cost of living index is 185.5. A 1-bedroom apartment is $1,500 per month. It is difficult for me to imagine being able to afford to live there. Sure, my wages would increase, but I still cannot fully comprehend it. I would settle for moving into a more rural area close to an airport, which would be cheap for flying back and forth. 4. The breakup. I am not really sure of the full truth. That is a dark place no one really wants to revisit, I guess. I am glad they did, because my mom would have dragged him down and ruined him in every way possible. My mom's version is that he was extremely abusive. She claimed he once tried to choke us both to death. She also said that when I learned to pull up on tables and such, he would get frustrated and scream at me. She claimed I tried to pull up on him and he brushed me off, kicked me down, and stormed off to live with his friends. My maternal grandmother, however, said she was the one who left him and that he begged to work out an arrangement so he could see me regularly. She said he even went as far as renting the place next to hers so I could be close. I am fairly certain the only reason my mom kept custody of me was so she could exert power over my dad and cause him more pain. My mom remarried, and they were together for about 14 years. Then my stepdad relocated for a job, and she was supposed to follow. Instead, she decided to email him that it was over, that she had been having an affair, and so on. I was standing in her office while my stepdaughter tried to call her. She ignored his calls and mocked him for being a crybaby. It made me sick, and I am disgusted to be associated with her. My former stepdad, like everyone else, is now much happier and a far nicer person without her in his life. 5. I have 4 half-brothers, 3 with my dad and 1 with my mom. The one with my mom, I grew up with, and neither of us cares for the other. The 3 with my dad only very recently learned about me, again because of their mom. I met 2 of them at the funeral. I did not have high expectations for connecting with them, as I know it must be very strange for them, and that is okay. Time is the key here. Story 8. The man I believe to be my biological father for 31 years actually adopted me when I was a child. I have an older half-sister I never knew existed. The siblings I believe to be full are actually half. Everyone in my family knew, except my siblings and me. This is a long and complicated story, so buckle up. My wife has always been really interested in genealogy and curious about my family history. About 7 years ago, she started innocently putting together my family tree on Ancestry.com. Early in her research, she discovered that my mother had married a man who shared my first name 13 months before I was born. My mom has a very colorful history, especially with marriage, so I didn't immediately assume the worst. It wasn't totally absurd to imagine her marrying, divorcing, meeting a new man, and getting pregnant within 4 months. My birth certificate listed the names of the people I always believed to be my mom and dad in their rightful places. However, the name coincidence seemed suspicious, so I mentioned it to my siblings. My sister approached our father about it, and he shut it down immediately. He said something like, "Your mother never lived with that man. It was a sham marriage to get military benefits." He also added somewhat threateningly that if my wife had further questions, she should ask him directly in person. Not wanting to stir up more trouble, my wife continued her research quietly over the next several years. She could not find a record of my mother's divorce from the man who shared my name. The next landmark in my mother's history was her marriage to the man I had always believed to be my father. 5 years after I was born, my wife found this suspicious and continued digging. She eventually discovered that the man who shared my name had been murdered 3 years into his marriage to my mother. Even more shocking, it was a cold case that went unsolved for roughly 20 years. Eventually, she found a photograph of him. The resemblance was uncanny. We finally had enough evidence to seriously question the story I had been told my entire life. The next step was to have my younger brother, the only child born after our mother's marriage to the man I believed to be my father, submit a DNA sample to 23andMe. He mailed it off, and 4 weeks later our suspicions were confirmed. He was my half-brother. I knew I had to approach my mother about this discovery, but I had to be careful. I didn't know if my mom had been juggling 2 men at once, and whether the man I had always believed to be my father truly thought he was my father. After several months of planning, I staged an excuse to be in my parents' city when my mother was home alone. We sat down, and I immediately confronted her with what I had learned. She started crying and told me everything she could remember. I was born with a different last name and named after my biological father. He had a daughter 5 years older than me from a previous marriage. When I was about 6 months old, my biological father relapsed into his drug addiction and became abusive. My mother fled and never looked back. She met my adoptive father sometime before my 2nd birthday, and they had a situation like in Jerry Maguire. He fell in love with me before he fell in love with her. After my biological father died and they married, he adopted me in a rigidly secretive adoption process that no longer exists. My birth certificate and entire existence were revised to reflect him as my father. Since my biological father was dead and I had no memory of him, they decided it was easiest to keep him a secret. This secret might have stayed buried if I had been born in the analog era, but my wife cracked it wide open using 2 accessible internet services. My wife has tracked down my older half-sister, but I am unsure if I want to open that box. She was old enough to remember my birth, but has never tried to find me. As it stands, she is the only person who can fill in some blanks about my biological father's story. Maybe I will reach out someday. In short, my parents lied to me my entire life about my biological father's identity. The man I believed to be my father actually adopted me as a child. They took great care to ensure their secret would never be revealed, but my wife accidentally discovered information online that cracked it all open. Story 9. My mom was the youngest of 5 siblings and had me when she was 43, while my youngest cousin was 30 at the time of my birth. Being the baby of the family, I was rarely told any family secrets until I was old enough to start asking questions. Some of the most striking ones I remember are as follows. 1. My grandmother was unofficially adopted. Her adoptive parents couldn't have children, and she was extremely sickly as a baby, so her biological family simply handed her over and said, "Here, have this." Supposedly, her bio mom returned to visit when my grandmother was around 9, but beyond that, she never saw them again and never desired to. Rumor has it that her biological father was unsure if she was truly his child, which is why they gave her up, though no one alive today can confirm this. 2. My oldest aunt was born in March of 1940, while my grandparents were married in April of the same year. Looking back, it's clear why my aunt would lie about her birth year. 3. My oldest aunt gave birth to a child at the age of 15, whom she gave up for adoption. From what I can piece together, it was a girl born on October 31st, 1955, somewhere in California, Utah, or possibly Idaho. My uncle told me that she disappeared for about 6 months in 1955 and returned as if nothing had happened. No one would talk about where she went or why. 4. My oldest aunt was heavily pregnant with her second child when she got married. I always wondered why there were no photos of her wedding, and now it's obvious why. The baby was not her husband's, though he knew and agreed to marry her anyway. They later had 2 more children, and he raised the first as his own. My cousin only discovered the truth as a teenager when my uncle angrily mentioned it during a fight. It initially caused a stir, but they eventually worked it out and are now very close. You would never know they weren't biologically related unless someone mentioned it. 5. When my mom was around 10, my grandfather attempted to hurt himself with a shotgun or rifle, a gift from my uncle. Supposedly, it was gruesome, but he survived. Comparing before and after pictures, there's little difference, so either the event wasn't as severe as my mom described, or he had excellent medical care. 6. All 3 of my aunts had children very young and gave them up for adoption. The oldest I have already mentioned. The second aunt had 2 children with her boyfriend, who was a powerful member of the Hells Angels in the 1960s. She gave both up. When she refused to give up the third, the boyfriend left, and she married a man who agreed to raise the child as his own. My third oldest aunt had 2 children, gave both up, and had no others as far as we know. My mom is the only sibling who never had any illegitimate children, though I was a surprise, as she had believed she couldn't have children. 7. The breaking point that made my mom divorce my dad was when he kicked down the bathroom door in a drunken rage. My mom was cowering in the bathtub with 1-week-old me while he threatened to hurt us with a broken bottle. That's when she demanded he take his things and leave, warning that if he fought for custody, she and my oldest aunt's lawyers would ensure he'd never see me again. Fortunately, he backed off and left. 8. When I was around 6, my dad's second wife, a major addict, who barely took her psych medications, threatened to kidnap me and transport me into SA slavery if my mom didn't relinquish custody. My mom was temporarily committed, and my dad moved to Southern California to keep his crazy bitch away from me. At the time, I was completely unaware of any of this. All I knew was that my dad had moved to California for work. That's about all I can recall for now. I'll add more if additional memories surface. Story 10. The secret kept from me all my life was that my biological father is, in truth, an incredible and upstanding man. My mother, however, painted a completely different picture. She filled my head with stories about how he tried to end us and how her brothers wanted to take him into the woods. She told me he left because he could not handle me, that he would get angry when I was just learning to pull myself up on things. According to her, he was a monster who refused to pay child support and abandoned us when he remarried and had more children. Meanwhile, I spent years crying myself to sleep, longing for a father, any father, but not the cruel man she later married. I would often ask why my letters to my dad never received a reply, though deep down, I now know she probably never sent them. Those unanswered hopes shaped me into someone who always felt unwanted. That wound only deepened because of my abusive mother, who constantly reminded me that I was the biggest mistake of her life. To this day, she still says it. She truly fits the definition of a toxic parent. For years, I wanted to reach out to my dad, but fear held me back. Finally, about 2 years ago, I gathered the courage, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. My mother grew increasingly nosy and anxious, prying into what we discussed because she knew the truth was finally surfacing and her control was slipping away. To confirm what I was learning, I turned to my maternal grandmother for clarity. The version she told me was nothing like the one I grew up believing. My father had desperately wanted to stay in my life. He even offered to pay my mother's rent so he could live next door and be close to me. He tried over and over again to contact me, sending gifts I never received. He never gave up on me. He was kept away. My paternal grandmother played a huge role in keeping the thread of connection alive. For reasons I still do not fully understand, my mother allowed me to stay in contact with her and even fly out to visit her. There must have been an unspoken agreement to keep my father at a distance because his name was never brought up. Yet when my grandmother passed away last year, her will revealed her final act of love. She left me a share for my father's portion of the inheritance, something she did for no other grandchild. Even in death, she tried to bring us together. When I flew out for her funeral, I met my father for the first time that I could remember. His current wife and my aunt spoke to me often about how lost he had felt without me, how he carried a constant ache in his heart, and how deeply he had wanted to be part of my life. They told me the words that he and I were both too emotional to say to each other, that he never stopped loving me. Looking back, my mother should have realized that the sudden stop in child support and contact meant something serious was happening. Maybe she did know. His then-wife had been struggling mentally and forbade him from communicating with me. Despite that, he secretly used payphones and a hidden account just to send what little he could. He truly tried, more than anyone ever gave him credit for. My maternal grandmother knew everything but could only say so much. Everything came to light when I was around 27 or 28. Knowing the truth has changed how I see my entire life. The pain of feeling unwanted still runs deep and has left lasting scars on my ability to connect socially. But now, I finally understand where I belong, with my father's side of the family. They have embraced me with warmth and love, something I never received from my mother. If I could, I would erase her from my story but keep the rest of her family close. For the first time, I feel loved, truly loved, by people who should have always been in my life. My mother's lies no longer define me. The gag order is over and everyone now openly says what I finally know in my heart. My dad is an amazing man. Story 11. I have a half-sister from my father's side. The story goes that her mother was known for lying to partners just to keep them around. So, when she told my dad that she was pregnant and still wanted to be with him, he didn't believe her. He ended up leaving and moving across the country with my mother for work. Her mother told everyone in town, the same town where we all live now, that my dad was the father. The girl grew up believing that, and one day when she was around 11, she apparently saw me at a local fair. She told her friends that I was her little brother. I don't remember that encounter at all, but my mother, who was the only one with me that day, said it happened. She even believed the girl might have been my sister and didn't correct her. It's also somewhat implied that my father might have cheated on my mother back then, or that they had briefly broken up. They were both very young, just 16 or 17, but they were independent, self-raised kids who had grown up on the streets. When I was around 10 or 12, the mother of the now 16-year-old girl filed a lawsuit demanding a DNA test and child support. That was when I first learned about everything officially. I even had to testify before a judge about my home life. The court eventually ruled that my father wasn't responsible for child support because the woman had made no effort to contact him beyond her initial claim and had only come forward when she ran into financial trouble. My dad was raised by people who lacked empathy, practically sociopaths, but he somehow grew into someone capable of compassion. At times, he can be gentle and kind, yet he also has a cold, narcissistic side that appears without warning. He never talks about my half-sister, has no interest in seeing her, and becomes furious if her name or family comes up in conversation. When I was about 23 and she was nearing 30, she reached out to me. We met at a small coffee shop and for the first time, we truly talked. To my surprise, we had so much in common. We laughed the same way and shared a similar sense of humor, the teasing, affectionate kind of humor my father uses when he pokes fun at people to show he's paying attention. For a while, it felt like meeting a long-lost reflection of myself. We bonded easily, but for her, it wasn't always easy. Seeing me, the son my father had raised, protected, and loved all his life, was painful. I was born with severe disabilities, yet my father had always worked hard to make sure I stayed healthy and cared for. Meanwhile, she had grown up without a father or any reliable male figure. The absence had left her with deep trust issues, especially toward men. We tried staying in touch, but eventually she admitted that maintaining our relationship was too painful. Seeing me constantly reopened old wounds she had already healed from years before. I had already told her I would understand if that happened, even though I had always wanted a sister and was eager to build something meaningful with her. It broke my heart when she pulled away, but I respected her choice. A few years later, I learned that she had developed a rare form of cancer. It was the kind usually found in children, but she got it as an adult due to a rare disorder that kept certain parts of her bones young. I reached out again and she invited both me and my mother to a fundraiser that also doubled as a possible goodbye party. We kept to ourselves for most of the event, not wanting to bring up family matters among her guests. But eventually, we got a quiet moment with her and her mother. We hugged, cried, and said what needed to be said. I gave her my number and told her it was okay if she didn't call. It's been about 5 years now, and I still haven't heard from her. But I did find out that she survived. She beat that rare cancer against all odds. I think about her sometimes, and though she's distant, I'm just grateful she's still alive. Some connections, even when brief, leave a mark that lasts forever. Story 12. It wasn't a secret kept only from me. It was hidden from our entire family. When my father passed away in the year 2015, we had to go through his belongings and decide what to keep for memories and what to part with. Being the gearhead, the car enthusiast, the grease monkey of the family, I was naturally assigned the garage. That was his sanctuary, his personal world where he could be completely alone. My task was to sort through his tools, see what I could use, and decide what could be sold or donated. In the very back of his toolbox, beneath an old shop rag, I found an envelope containing a letter he had written to his own father, my grandfather, a few days after his death in 1986. The words inside were raw and heavy. In the letter, my father was furious, scolding his dad for an affair he had apparently carried on behind my grandmother's back. From what I gathered, the affair might have even led to a child, a possible half-sibling that no one else in the family knew about. It seemed my father had discovered the truth firsthand, though the details were left unsaid. The letter mentioned a physical confrontation between them. My father had struck his father and threatened him in anger. My father had carried this burden alone his entire life. He never told a soul, not even my grandmother, knowing it would shatter her completely. So, when my grandfather passed away, this letter became my father's only release, his way of purging years of resentment without tearing apart what remained of the family. From what I understood, my grandfather eventually admitted to his mistake, ended the affair, and cut ties with the other woman entirely. Whether that woman was married to, or whether the child was ever born, my father never revealed. According to what he wrote, my grandfather never saw the woman again. I was born in 1982, so my memories of my grandfather are faint, the kind of memories you see through a child's innocent eyes. But after reading that letter, the image I had of him changed. A dark shadow was cast over the kind old man I remembered. Now, I'm the only one who knows about the letter and the secret it holds. It has been almost 3 years since I discovered it, and I still haven't told anyone. Not my mother, not my siblings, not anyone. My grandmother passed away in the year 2000, and my father's only surviving siblings are my aunt and uncle. We hardly speak. When my grandfather died in 1986, our family slowly fell apart. So I often wonder, is there any reason to bring this secret to light now? Would telling anyone do anything but reopen old wounds that time has already sealed? Some questions linger, of course. Could I have an unknown aunt or uncle out there? Cousins I've never met? Is it worth uncovering after all these years, when I never knew them or even knew they existed until just 3 years ago? My conscience tells me no. My grandfather made a grave mistake, but he made his choice long ago, and whatever decisions followed shaped the family we have now, for better or worse. Perhaps some secrets are meant to rest with the people who carried them. Story 13. I recently discovered that the man I had always thought was my great-uncle was actually my grandpa. I had been raised believing his brother was my grandpa. My grandma had 7 kids, and each of those kids had 4 to 7 children of their own, and a few now have even more kids, so we were always a close, big family. My great-uncle had never married and never had children, but he was always close to the family. People would joke that he was really my grandpa, and sometimes even joked to my mom that he was actually her dad, because we all resembled him more than his brother, and he always took extra care of us and a few of my cousins more than others in the family. He was also a very wealthy oilman. We discovered the truth in a rather sad and complicated way. In the past few years, he became seriously ill, and an uncle of mine attempted to weasel in and take advantage of the situation to claim all of his money and land for himself, cutting out the rest of the family. My mom was scrambling to figure out a way to stop him because by the time the rest of the family realized what this greedy uncle was attempting, my wealthy great-uncle was already too far gone, both mentally and physically, to intervene or make changes. The greedy uncle had already manipulated him into changing his will, telling my great uncle that if he left him all the money, he would manage it and distribute it equally among the family. Of course, he was lying. Instead, he gave large amounts of land to his own daughters and did many other unscrupulous things. By the time we started to untangle the situation, the great uncle was no longer mentally capable of revising the will in a way that would hold up in court. So my mom gathered a few of her sisters, whom the great uncle had particularly cared for, and arranged paternity tests. The results confirmed that all of my grandma's younger children were biologically his, revealing that somewhere along the line, after my grandma and the man I thought was my grandpa had their 4 older children, she began an affair with his brother and had 3 children, keeping it secret. My grandma is genuinely one of the sweetest and most innocent people in the world, so it is remarkable and surreal to realize that she managed to keep such a profound secret for so long. My great uncle, who is actually my real grandpa, just passed away very recently. The greedy uncle who had lied his way into the will still does not know about the paternity test. It is essentially a real-life soap opera. I feel the worst for my mom because it is almost impossible to imagine realizing that the man you thought was your father your entire life was not, and only discovering the truth after he passed away. The man you thought was your dad died a few years ago, and his brother is your real father. Even more complicated, what was considered your half-brother, who is not even the son of your real dad, is now taking possession of everything your real dad owned, keeping it for himself, and leaving you and your immediate family in the cold. This situation has hit hard because both of my parents are teachers working in a challenging environment, and they had always been reassured by my real grandpa that they would not need to worry about retirement, as he was setting things up for my mom's comfort. Because of that assurance, she never made other plans, and now they are essentially living paycheck to paycheck, unsure of how to move forward or protect what is rightfully theirs. It is a complicated, heartbreaking situation, and the emotional toll on our family is immense. Story 14. I have 4 stories. 1. My childhood memories are quite vague, but I distinctly remember a moment in kindergarten when I was with my dad, going to school in Nevada. My parents were divorced at the time, and my mom had custody of me. It wasn't until much later that I discovered the truth. My dad had actually kidnapped me and enrolled me in school so I could be with him. I only found out when my mom and aunt were reminiscing and mentioned that time when dad kidnapped me. 2. I later learned that the reason my parents divorced was because my dad had been physically and verbally abusing my mother to the point where she had to file multiple restraining orders. I had no idea about the abuse until my last day of high school, when we were asked to pick up our personal files. There, neatly filed and documented, were all the restraining orders she had taken out against him. 3. My mom remarried while I was still in high school. She met a man through online dating and things escalated quickly. I did not like him at all, and my mom knew this, so she didn't even invite me to their wedding in Vietnam. I probably wouldn't have gone anyway. He moved in with us, and I never once saw him go to work. Every time I came home, his sloppy buns were on the computer, watching Vietnamese dramas. He repeatedly quit learning English. I have no issue with immigrants, but my mom was a single mother working tirelessly to support me, my grandparents, and him, and he didn't even have the decency to learn English to help her. He quickly landed on my permanent do not like list. Somehow, my mom would always go shopping with him, claiming he had a big bonus at work, which baffled me because I never saw him work. When I asked her what he did, she always gave vague answers. A few years later, a couple of months before I planned to move out, there was a violent knock on our door. As I walked down the hallway to check, my family pulled me aside, instructing me to stay out of sight of the peephole and not to open the door. The knocking continued for about half an hour, and I kept asking what was happening, but no one gave me a straight answer. Finally, one of my relatives, either my aunt or my mom, broke and explained that it was a loan shark coming to collect a debt. Apparently, my stepfather's job was freaking gambling, and he owed around $10,000. That officially cemented him on my permanent do not like list. All the other adults knew about this, but they had kept it from me because I was a kid, even though I was 21. 4. What upset me the most was that my younger cousins were present, only around 5 and 7 years old. I was terrified for their safety because I genuinely thought someone might barge in with a weapon. My only reference for loan sharks at the time was purely fictional, so my fear was magnified. Endangering my freaking family like that, especially the little ones, ensured that my stepfather would remain firmly on my do not like list for life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.